The Puck Portfolio with Andy MacNeil.
Hey, welcome to the Puck Portfolio for Friday, September 27th. The NHL season is quickly approaching. I'm your host, Andy MacNeil, and I'll be joined in just a little while by Nick Martin and Michael Leboff from the Action Network's Line Change Hockey podcast. We'll be breaking down three teams, starting with the Minnesota Wild, moving on to the Los Angeles Kings, and then moving on to the Eastern Conference to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, yeah, we'll find out, can Kirill Kaprizov carry the Minnesota Wild to the Stanley Cup playoffs? They missed last season for the first time after 4 consecutive appearances. And what about the LA Kings? They underwent some changes this offseason. Will they be a playoff team in 2024-25? And the Tampa Bay Lightning, can Andrei Vasilevsky bounce back? Probably a good bet. And will Jake Guentzel set a new career high with the Tampa Bay Lightning? We'll talk about all that and more on today's episode, all from a betting perspective here on the Puck Portfolio. All right, like I said, we've got some teams to get through, some stragglers that are, not quite in the top of the league, the top 12, let's just say. So we've got 15, 14, and 13 to get through, at least according to my rankings. And boys, we'll start with number 15, the Minnesota Wild. To me, they're the definition of mediocrity. I mean, they haven't won a playoff series since the 2014-15 season. It's been 21 years since they made it past the second round. For, pretty incredible for a franchise that's only been in existence for about 25 years. Last season, they went 39, 34, and 9. They finished 6th in the Central Division with 87 points, ending a streak of 4 consecutive playoff appearances. Let's start with, just generally where you think this team is going to finish this year. Michael, I'll start with you because I think you're a little bit more in line with me. I think Nick is kind of on an island here when it comes to the Wild, at least as far as the three of us are concerned. So Mike, where do you see the Wild finishing this season in the Central Division?
I think that they're going to struggle to be relevant in this division that is now a little bit deeper, with everyone expecting Utah to take a step forward. Who knows how the moves will work for Nashville. You'll still have Dallas and Colorado at the top. Winnipeg had put up 110 points last year. Even if they take a step back, like, is it going to be a big one? I think St. Louis is kind of in the same class as Minnesota. And Chicago should be much better than the 52-point team that they were. So, yeah, I think that it's not just the roster that lacks, kind of upside in my mind, but it's also their environment is tougher than it was and it has been in previous years. The Central for a long time has had at least 2 bottom dwellers with Arizona and then Chicago kind of just bottoming out. Like, I think last year, two years in a row for Chicago under 60 points. Arizona obviously was struggling for quite a bit before having a little bit of an improvement last year, but still we're clearly the number 7 team here. So I think the floor of the division getting raised and their floor and ceiling coming down kind of creates a little bit of choppy waters for Minnesota. So I do think that they're a team that I'm happy to bet against, and I'll take a shot with them on. They're 150-1 to finish with the worst record in the league, and I know that's not going to win, but I think that they'd be my favorite long shot in the wooden spoon market. And part of it is that I just don't think we're going to see what we've seen from the NHL in previous years, in recent years, where we'll have like 3 or 4 teams under 60 points. I think that to finish with the worst record, like, you're probably maybe low 60s, depending on what we see out of some of the bottom dwellers, but it could be even higher than that. And I do think like their absolute bottom, which who knows if it happens, could be like high 60s. Maybe they're in the running here. And if they are struggling, their team, I would absolutely have no issue. I don't think with tearing it down and trading off players, the Kaprizov situation looms. So I do think that there is like a slight path to success or lack of success for Minnesota to finish at the very, very bottom. And that's all you're looking for at 150-1. They're not 10-1, they're 150-1.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess they'll be in the mix. I'm not quite there, though. For me, I've got the Wild as a fringe playoff team, probably the most fringe playoff team of them all. I've got them at 44% to make the playoffs right now, 92-point finish. So I actually think they're a good bet to miss the playoffs at plus 120. I think that line should be closer to minus 130, minus 127 to be exact. So quite a bit of value, in my opinion, when it comes to the Wild missing the playoffs. Nick, I think you're on the other side of things, though. So we'll kind of go, along the spectrum here from possibly worst in the league to fringe playoff team to, maybe a little bit more optimistic of a fringe playoff team for you.
Yeah, I mean, not like I'm so far over. I would still, if you were forcing me to bet a side, I'd be betting them to miss at plus 120. So it's not like I'm way over here, but I can at least see the arguments in their favor. They had horrible luck in terms of injuries last season. It became a gong show. And I think there's a lot of guys who could take steps forward. So I like that. And I think when you compare them to a team like the Blues, that's really unfair for me because they still have Brodeen, Faber, Middleton, Spurgeon, and I like Declan Chisholm back there. So for me, those defense cores just aren't close. I think this team can do a much better job insulating their goaltending. And I think then goaltending is the other thing you're going to point to where if this team bounces back, I think it's going to be Gustafsson bounces back like a number one starter. He's only a year removed from a really good season. And then, like we talked about before, I think it's going to be Wallstat slowly edging out Fleury for the backup role. So maybe that takes a little time to happen. Maybe they lose some points in that process, but I think that duo could be a pretty good 1-2 goaltending tandem. So that's kind of the causes for optimism here with me is I just think that if you have some better luck with the injuries, still got a good defense core. If they get some goaltending, I think this team could bounce back.
Yeah, absolutely, totally reasonable take. And I think, yeah, there is some upside here for sure. The Wild did have a lot of bad injury luck last season. Of course, Jared Spurgeon missed a bunch of time. He played in just 16 games, but that did lead to the emergence of Brock Faber, though, which was pretty big for the Wild. He finished second in Calder Trophy voting. Spurgeon should be good to go for this season, but after him, Faber and Jonas Brodin, I think the defense corps is a little bit weak. But you mentioned some other players there. Tell me what you like about this Wild blue line and why you think they're a bit better than a team like, say, the St. Louis Blues. Obviously, the betting market in agreement with you. They've got the Wild at 94.5 points at most sports books. One sports book, North Star Bets, has them at 95.5. Whereas the Blues, they're a team that is closer to the 86, 85.5 point mark.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, if you look at it, they should have 3 of their top 4 in their defense core are going to be well better than league average. Brodeen, Faber, Spurgeon, if they can stay healthy, that should power a pretty good top 4. And then, like I said, I like Declan Chisholm. I think he can be a better than average third pairing guy. So for me, altogether, that puts their unit up there. And I think it's obviously just going to come down to what kind of depth you get up front. I think a lot of people would point to the potential center duo of Marco Rossi and Joel Eriksson Ek as a weakness, but I don't know if that's so much a weakness relative to other fringe playoff teams. I think that duo could be pretty good. Could see Rossi keep taking steps forward. So those would be my things that I'm pointing to in terms of things to like about the Wild.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned Marco Rossi. No player props for him right now. Looking for a breakout season in 24-25. But I think the Wild in general, people look at them and they look at their center depth as being an issue. Joel Eriksson Ek, probably the best center on the team. He had a good season with 30 goals and 64 points in 69 games. I'm not sure he's a true number one center, though. Obviously, Kirill Kaprizov had another great season, 46 goals and 96 points in 75 games. Matt Boldy, 29 goals and 69 points in 75 games. So once again, just as I list these off, you hear the game totals, and none of their top players played more than 75 games. So that's definitely something working in their favor this year, barring injury. Heading into the season, though, some player props up. Kaprizov, 47.5 goals, 97.5 points. Seems a little high, to be honest, at least on the goals total, maybe. Joel Eriksson Ek, 27.5, and Matt Boldy, 31.5 for their goal totals. This team really, I mean, I think they're arguably the most boring team in the NHL year in, year out. And, other than betting on them to miss the playoffs or, um, uh, you know, have a bad season in one way or another. Is there anything to like about any of these players from a player prop perspective, or is it a wait and see approach with this team?
I actually don't mind taking a shot on Kaprizov in the heart race and in the rocket race. There were numbers up there that I liked. I agree. I would definitely prefer those over betting over 47.5 goals, which 48 would be his career high. But
Yeah,
he actually has put up pretty ridiculous numbers. And even last season, I always point to him as the guy that I think everyone always has this one, has that guy that they're trying to say had an underrated year and nobody talked about this enough. And I think that was Kaprizov down the stretch because once the Wild were pretty irrelevant, he was on fire and he finished with 96 and 75 games and 46 goals. And the team
yeah.
was pretty beat up. Like he was really powering that a lot. He was playing at a pretty insane level. So I think he has that upside. He's starting to be, I mean, he's kind of priced as such, but I feel like he's almost flying under the radar a little bit for how incredible his productivity has been.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I mean, uh, if he can exceed 47 and a half goals, then he's probably in the Car Trophy conversation, right? So you'd be you'd be better off looking at a long shot bet than a minus 110 over. But yeah, just I guess quick note on the goaltending. Gustafson and Fleury, they ranked among the middle of the pack in save percentage last season, but both goaltenders well below average when accounting for shot quality among goaltenders that faced at least 1,000 unblocked shot attempts. Fleury ranked fourth worst among those goaltenders in goals saved above expected, while Gustafson ranked fifth worst. Bet365 has Gustafson's win total at 23 and a half. Final thoughts on the Wild, Michael Leboff.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. Like I don't even know if it's as much as I was saying about this team as much as it is. I just think it's going to be a more competitive league overall. Like that's what I've been going off of this whole um as we've been doing all these previews. I just think the league generally got better,
Yeah.
especially the bottom part of it. So I do think we could see one of these teams where maybe it's St. Louis or a team, but like a team in this class, I think does end up tanking or nose diving into that realm. And when you're dealing 150 to 1, I don't hate the number. And I also just wonder about this team's kind of general, as Nick was saying before, like he thinks they're going to try to compete. I think that's probably true, at least in the beginning. But if things aren't looking good for them to make the playoffs, this is a team I can see really trying to make hay and look at next year pretty quickly, or the following season from this one pretty quickly, because that's when all that dead money comes off the books. They got to settle the Kaprizov situation down a little bit. It's starting to gather some smoke, and the goaltending could be very funky. So I just think there's enough smoke to make me interested in them bottoming out. But I would say that I would say it's much more likely than not that they're like kind of just hovering around 90 points on the year.
Yeah, reports out there floating around hockey Twitter that maybe Kaprizov is looking to go Chicago in a couple of years, but we will see. Wouldn't surprise me, as I said. Minnesota, just not seeming like the destination that a star like Kaprizov wants to play in. But we'll move on to a team that I've got a little higher on the totem pole. I would imagine that you guys do as well, but they underwent some changes over the summer. The Los Angeles Kings, 44, 27, and 11 last season. They finished with 99 points. But of course, once again, they were eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers in the first round of the playoffs for the third season in a row. Seems like that's just their destiny at this point. They're going to match up against the Oilers in the playoffs unless they get lucky, and even if they don't meet them in the first round, if they're lucky enough to get through that first round, the Oilers will probably be there waiting for them in the second round. So pretty tough to avoid Edmonton, and that's going to haunt this team for many years to come, you would think. But right now, in the short term, the biggest story out of Los Angeles is Drew Doughty. So yesterday, Daily Faceoff's Frank Saravelli reported that the blue liner suffered an injury to his left ankle, and the initial X-ray showed a fracture. The team is hoping that Doughty's ailment is only a fracture and not any structural damage, but he was set to go for more imaging on Thursday. Have yet to hear anything back on that, at least at the time of this recording. No timeline on his return. So, what does this mean for the Kings from a betting perspective? Obviously, a big loss if he misses any significant time. But is there a player that could, maybe step up and assume that role as the team's power play quarterback and the number one guy?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to watch because Jordan Spence probably could have gotten more usage last year. I know a lot of Kings fans were really high on him and thought he was excellent. So it could be him, and he's obviously going to get some more minutes at even strength. But I think the most likely candidate to take over the top power play unit will be Brent Clark, who is getting circled on a lot of people's ranks and guides as a player that could go off this season and a guy you might want to target in deeper fantasy leagues. And I think that's definitely true right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how it looks entering the year. But I'm expecting him to take over the top power play role given his offensive upside. So yeah, that should make him potentially a sneaky guy to bet on earlier in the season to get some points and shots. And like I said, in deeper fantasy leagues, I think he'll be a pretty good get right now.
Michael, where do you have the Kings heading into the season? I've got them at 97 points. Still a playoff team, 73% chance of making the playoffs. But not a lock by any means, but still a pretty good chance. Where do you've got the Kings heading into the 2024-25 season?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. That they're just team that will more likely than not they make the playoffs even with the Dowdy news. But they definitely have some vulnerabilities, and I think that the Pacific has some teams that are a little sneaky. Nick and I talked a bunch in our Western Conference preview about the Ducks, perhaps having some upside if things go their way to nip at the heels of a team like Los Angeles or Vancouver. But I do think it's likely that this division kind of goes as people see it, with the four teams, Vancouver, Edmonton, LA, and Vegas, kind of just being a step above the other four. But in a season where things perhaps break the wrong way for Los Angeles and the right way for another team like Anaheim, I do think there's some issues. You and I talked about my favorite bet with Los Angeles, and I know from talking with Nick, he endorses it too, which is Darcy Kuemper in the triple digits to win the Vezina. If I were to make one pro Kings bet this season, and uh, it would be Kemper to do so to win the Vezina. I know you like him. I know Nick likes him. Just generally, I think he's a little underrated because if he had that one bad year, and perhaps he's now like aged out of his prime, and he's starting to be on the wrong side of the mountain. But in a much in a really strong defensive environment, I think that Darcy Kuemper has some upside to do what Cam Talbot did early last year. There was a time last year where Cam Talbot was one of the favorites to win the Vezina Trophy because of how well he was playing behind that defense. And even with the system change, I do think this team plays a really responsible game and should prop up Kemper quite a bit. He definitely has the upside, more upside than Talbot, just talent wise. So that's my favorite bet. It's one of my favorite awards futures as well. But so I like Kemper as my favorite like Kings talking point going into the year.
Yeah, I can see that as well. I know you brought that up on one of the other shows that we did. Nick, you still see the Kings as a playoff team, more or less?
Yeah, I do. I like them, and I like what Mike just outlined as well. And I even think Kemper's worth a shot. I think it's 60 to 1 to have the most goalie wins. I don't think
Wow.
that's the worst bet if they ride him. I think this can still be a pretty strong regular season team. I'm kind of high on them relative to the market compared to some of the teams in the division, like the Canucks. I think right now the Canucks are a little overvalued in my opinion, and just mainly because of the Demko situation, and which I think is a relevant note to both the goaltending markets we just gave out because Demko's still priced as a favorite in both of those markets, which I think right now seems like a pretty crazy bet. So I like the Kings. I think they should be steadily right around what they were last year. Even without the Doughty situation, I think they can hopefully manage that a little better. Like I'm kind of hoping that the market goes against them a little bit here in the coming weeks, and we get a couple chances to jump on some King stuff.
Yeah, so obviously the big change for LA, aside from Kemper, the player they traded for Darcy Kemper, Pierre-Luc Dubois, gone to Washington now. They brought in Warren Fogle from the Edmonton Oilers. They lost Victor Arvidsson in free agency to the Edmonton Oilers. So some significant changes to the roster, but Looking at this team, the one thing I really have a hard time with is the player props because, nobody on this team gets a significant amount of ice time. And, even looking at a guy like Quentin Byfield, he scored 20 goals last season in 80 games. I played out just over 16 minutes a game. You would think he would have an even more important role this season, but how much does his ice time really increase, right, on this team? And therefore, how many goals can he score, right? So sportsbooks have him listed at 24 and a half goals. And I just, maybe he gets to that mark. That wouldn't be outrageous by any means, but it's just hard to see him really exceeding that mark. Given the way this team is structured, you look at some of the other players. Anze Kopitar, 24 and a half goals, 66 and a half points. Adrian Kempe, 32 and a half goals, 73 and a half points. Of course, Kempe had, that monster season, scoring 40 goals in 82 games in 22-23, scored 35 in 78 games the year before that, dropped to 28 goals in 77 games last season, despite leading the Kings in shots. But he did, however, set a new career high in points with 75. So yeah, I'm just having a hard time, finding any player props that I like for LA. I think they're all pretty fair, but is there anything that sticks out to either of you guys when it comes to those kind of props for the LA Kings?
Yeah, I mean, no, not for me. I think, like you said, there's still Kopitar and Deneau there, and pretty good guys to compete with. I like Byfield, but I think there's enough. I mean, that's why I like them as a team. But yeah, like you said, I think he's kind of getting properly credited. And then as we went on earlier, I think just kind of watching that defensive situation and maybe trying to get some good numbers on some Spence or Clark stuff earlier in the year could be kind of the only advice I have on that front.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think with Spence and Clark, those markets are going to adjust really quickly if either of those players steps up into the role and produces. So you want to test out those waters early in the season for sure. Michael, any final thoughts on the Kings? I mean, Darcy Kuemper over under 24 and a half wins. So I think there's some optimism there in terms of your bet for him to have a good season, but. Anything else, or is it just a long shot Vezina Trophy bet when it comes to the Los Angeles Kings?
Yeah, it's really the only actionable take I have for this team. I just think that they are um, relatively like there's not enough value going in either direction on them, whether you're anti or pro Kings right now.
Yeah,
They were a team that I thought was a really good Stanley Cup flyer a few weeks into last season, and then they went on that crazy losing streak, and so maybe like something like that where you kind of sit back and wait because they do tend to fly under the radar quite a bit. And as you
yeah,
said, like I think just everybody on this across like the players outside of Kemper is getting like the proper credit. Like if you're betting a big season from Byfield, you're thinking like 30 plus goals. He's only plus 650 to do that, and with the
yeah.
as you were saying, like with the ice time and stuff, you'd probably want a bigger number on that, or if you wanted to go past 40, same thing there because there just aren't long enough numbers in these markets to begin with. So yeah, long story short, just Kemper.
Yeah, not even Anze Kopitar plays 20 plus minutes a
Right.
night on this team. So yeah, it's difficult to see anybody's totals increasing all that much given what we've seen. But the last team we're going to cover today is the Tampa Bay Lightning. Of course, the Lightning survived the injury to Andre Vasilevsky last season. He missed the first couple of months. They still claimed the wild card spot, but that was as far as they went. And following the season, they traded Mikhail Sergachev to the Utah Hockey Club. They let Steven Stamkos walk in free agency and they signed Jake Guentzel in his place. So lots to, I guess, be excited about when it comes to the Lightning. They're going to be a pretty fun team to watch as always. But let's start with Jake Guentzel because I think people are expecting a big season out of him, and rightfully so, barring injury. I think you're looking at a point per game player or better. Sportsbooks have him right now at 86 and a half points, 35 and a half goals. His career high is 84 points. And he's played with elite players before, but I don't think it's hard to see how playing with Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov could lead to a new career high for this player.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would still be betting the over there. And like you said, I think some people have been taking it a little far with the plays with like the situation he's going to get in now. It's slightly better, but he's played with Crosby his whole life and some prime years there. So it's not
Yeah.
like he's been slumming it at all. But I yeah, like I said, I still would like the over with that total there. I don't know if I quite think he's like as much of a smash as like a rocket bet yet at this point. I think with just like how competitive it is. I think he is the 10th favorite in that market. Oh no, so he's still 50 to 1. I wouldn't hate that. Okay. Yeah. I think you could do a lot worse than betting him at 50 to 1, but still, it feels like people are really, really counting on a huge season from Gensel here.
Yeah, to be fair, Sidney Crosby wasn't putting up 140 points in a season like Nikita Kucherov. Michael, your take on the Gensel acquisition and what you see for him this season?
Yeah, I think Nick's right, right? Like it's a good situation, good player, makes their forward group a little bit better than it was with Stamkos, but I think it just adds like that was already a strength for them, the top of the roster up front, and so it didn't really. He's the type of player that addresses like the Stamkos hole and makes that spot on the roster maybe a little bit better, or does make it better just in a vacuum. But their weaknesses remain their
Yep.
weaknesses, which I think is the concern here for me and like getting really behind this team. I you started to hear like when they made the Gensel move, some people in like the hockey media get a little carried away with like, oh man, like are the Lightning back? Are they a good? Are they going to win the Atlantic? All this stuff. Like, are they back to being like their dominant selves? And that started to taper off a little bit. And I was actually kind of surprised that it did, because usually once that ball gets rolling, like, it doesn't
Yeah.
stop for the offseason. We see it all the time with, like, what we've seen with other teams that do stuff like that, but, so I think that they're clearly the right there with the Bruins and, like, is, like, the 3rd or 4th best or most talented team in this division, but I do think that their floor is pretty low. That said, if you do like them, the one bet I would keep an eye on, I don't particularly think it's great right now, is John Cooper in the Jack Adams market. He's never won it, and it's always a talking point when his name gets brought up. So I think that if Tampa finds a way to click and you start to see, okay, like this team is much better than we thought, and maybe they start slow, but like there's signs there that they could be a lot better. Um, then I would start to circle that Cooper number if it drifts a little bit up out of this like 20 to 1 range. They would need to do something special because he will get credit for having Nikita Kucherov and such. But I do think that if the Lightning have like a really balls to the wall season, um, or you want to bet on them doing that, I think Cooper in that market is interesting just because if he's in the running, people will be like, "Oh, well, we've never given it to him before, so
Yeah.
now is the time." So that's the one thing, and it would be correlated to with like Vasilevsky bouncing back. So you can also look there.
For sure, yeah. So, looking at the Lightning's regular season points total, 98.5 at Bet365, shaded to the under. And I had them at 97 points, a 67% chance of making the playoffs. So, they are still very much in the mix. A 10% chance of winning the division. Not quite in the mix there. I actually have Tampa Bay as the fourth best team in the Atlantic Division. So a wild card team, more or less. Nick, do you have this team? Are you a little bit higher, a little bit lower? Where are you at on the Lightning?
I'm very neutral, like exactly with you in the market on the Lightning. I think last year they came in at what 98 points. And I think that you look at the additions and the subtractions, for me, it said should settle right about the same. I
Yeah.
think that the goaltending situation, like you're betting on a bit of a bounce back from Vasilevsky. He really hasn't been that dominant in a few years here. And like, I think for that reason and with, like, where some of their guys are going in terms of aging, that kinda nullifies the Gensel edition for me. Like, I think you're getting the right amount of credit for what Gensel will bring to the table, for them to be hanging in at that number. And then last year, obviously, they didn't really have Sergachev, and I like JJ Moser, so that's kind of the way I'm seeing it in terms of the defense core as well. So for those reasons, I'm kind of right with you in the market, thinking that this should be about a 98 point team, especially the bottom of the division really should be a lot more competitive. I think there's a case for pretty much all 4 of the teams that were below Tampa last year, so I think that'll also keep them from, reaching too high, reaching into that well into the hundreds in terms of points.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Andre Vasilevsky, as far as he's concerned, he had a pretty mediocre season. Did spend the first couple of months on the shelf with an injury, as I mentioned. He posted an 899 save percentage in 52 games while allowing roughly 1 goal above expected, so pretty average. However, in the 3 years prior, Vasilevsky had posted a 918 save percentage and saved the team almost 60 goals more than an average goaltender would have, according to Evolving Hockey. So, pretty good bet to bounce back. And sportsbooks Bet365 in particular have him listed at 33 and a half wins. But his partner Jonas Johansson, not a good goaltender. I mean, to be fair, it was his first time that playing more than 9 games in a season, but 29 years old, and he has allowed more than 30 goals above expected in 61 career games, according to Evolving Hockey. He allowed 7 more goals than an average goaltender would have in 26 games last season. That ranks 7th worst among goaltenders who faced at least 1,000 unblocked shot attempts. So not a lot to like there in the crease, unless it's Vasilevsky. But yeah, I don't see how this team is better than Florida. Obviously, the Stanley Cup champs, the Boston Bruins, or the Toronto Maple Leafs. But we will see. I think their ceiling, they've got a high enough ceiling that they could surprise people and maybe do something special and get John Cooper that Jack Adams trophy, like Michael is hoping for. But yeah, just I think they're just destined to be in the middle of the pack at this point, and that seems to be the consensus opinion here. Any hot takes regarding this team, betting or otherwise?
No, not really.
No.
Like
Yeah, no, I think the
the
only one
hottest
I'll
take
throw.
I had was
Oh, sorry,
Cooper.
Mike.
Yeah, I was gonna say the hottest one I think I had was just like I think if they do surpass all our expectations, like I do think Cooper is going to be in the mix just based on him not having won the award. I think you can make a similar argument for Mike Sullivan too, if like Pittsburgh does something like
Yeah.
that.
Okay, and I think just to stir it up a little bit with you, Andy, I actually like them a little bit to finish above Boston, even though I'm kind of still right with them on in terms of the market. I think their offensive upside is a lot higher, so I'll put that out there as just something that people can circle back on and get after me for if it's wrong.
But the Bruins have the better Jonas in the backup role, though. So
Better decor, better goaltending, and they always win a ton of games. So I'm ready to wear it, but I think that could be the one hot take I have.
yeah, I've got the Lightning winning the Stanley Cup 3% of the time. So yeah, still in the mix, still a contender, but not quite the same stature that they were a few years ago. But yeah, big bounce back season from Vasilevsky, and a lot could change for Tampa Bay. Next week, I'll be getting into the top 12 teams in the league. Probably kicking things off with the Vegas Golden Knights maybe on Monday, maybe talking about the Vancouver Canucks. Still some of that to be decided, but I really appreciate you guys joining the show today. I'm sure we'll do it a lot this season, but it's fun having you guys on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us, Andy.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy.
All right. Well, I'll be the first to admit that was not the most exciting episode. We had 3 boring teams to cover for the most part, and we did it. We got through them. Next week, though, we'll be getting into the top teams in the NHL. A lot more to talk about, a lot more to bet on, some division winners, and more coming up next week on the Puck Portfolio. Until then, good luck with your bets.